Um, well, since the rule to not thank folks has already eroded, I'm going to start as well, and I'm going to start by thanking Bob Hauser, who probably doesn't remember this, but taught me everything that I know about structural equation modeling at the University of Wisconsin a long, long, long time ago. And that's actually a good starting point for what I want to talk about. I'll take a slightly different take on the American experiment than I think others have taken, as somebody who has spent a good chunk of my life looking at the experiment from the outside in, rather than having lived it in this country. And a lot of my early research at the University of Wisconsin as a PhD student dealt with the beneficial effects of us being surrounded by people we fundamentally disagree with, whose views, whose values are different from our own, and the positive impacts that has on democratic citizenship, on feeling efficacious about the change we can make, about learning, about ultimately participating. And the punchline from that research, I think, is disagreement is good. It's a fundamental part of liberal democracies. But as many of our conversations today have shown, and a lot of my previous speakers have highlighted, we're in a world where a lot of that disagreement happens in isolated biospheres that allow us to surround ourselves with people that think just like ourselves, very often hold the same beliefs, some true, many not. And maybe more importantly, some of our work in recent years, and by ours, I mean also my colleague Dominique Bressard, who is here in mine, has shown that we have a really hard time disagreeing with each other in a civil fashion. We talked about this as the nasty effect, this idea that uncivil disagreement online doesn't just erode democracy, it actually ends up undermining our trust in institutions like the New York Times, as well as they may still be doing, but the very journalism that is the backbone of our democracy is being undermined by the yelling and screaming that may happen in the comments section of the New York Times or on social media or anywhere else, and that's a phenomenon that's pretty well documented by now. But the question on the future of the experiment for me, of this great experiment, and Samuel's points really resonated with me. I think that experiment has been highly dynamic and has had better moments and some not so good moments. My parents still remember American GIs coming into Germany and liberating the country, number one, but number two, establishing a political system and a democratic system that has remained fairly stable over the years, and I'll get to 2024 in a second. But even as an immigrant, for me, that has always been a very aspirational idea in all its flaws. But I think right now we're at a point politically, many of you have followed what's happening in Germany with the collapse of the coalition government, and also some of the state elections that have produced a rise in ultra-right voting, and I'll say that euphemistically, that is troubling, and we'll see how that's going to play out in February when the new election is taking place. And I think the world overall, not just the US, is looking more like Weimar than it looks like that aspirational, that exciting moment that my parents felt after World War II. And that is something that I think goes beyond what we've already talked about. The idea that the American experiment, of course, is something that's important to us, but it's a blueprint for a good chunk of the rest of the world. And I think that blueprint is increasingly difficult to export. It's increasingly difficult to export because, of course, we ourselves don't live it well in terms of disagreeing with each other in a productive fashion. We're so entrenched on each side of our ideological lines of difference and unable to talk across those lines of difference. But number two, and I think January 6th was probably just one example of that, our institutions are beginning to erode, where it's going to be an increasingly difficult sell to go to Viktor Orban, just came up, to some other countries to say, well, this is the model you want to follow in all its flaws. But I'll echo, I think, what John said in his comments at the end. I think meetings like this and knowing how many brilliant minds are working on those problems moving forward, a lot of these questions have value-based solutions. Many of them have empirical questions behind them on how we can do this better and how we can put processes in place and doing this better. So normally my students tell me that my lectures end up with the most depressing notes, and as a German I take some perverse pride in that. But today the optimism far outweighs the dread, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.